last year in the playoffs, we had two NFC North teams make the playoffs. The Minnesota Vikings came in at the end, ended up upsetting the New Orleans Saints. And then we had the Green Bay Packers finishing as the number 2 seed and, making it to the conference championship game before getting destroyed by the San Francisco 49ers. And coming into the offseason, the Packers looked like a team that was just ready to take the next step. And they had a lot of success going for them. They just had to upgrade a few positions. And they were going to be considered one of the elite teams in the NFC. Now, whereas the Vikings were a team that had a lot of talent, but it was a team that kind of was more of an overachieving team than I would say an elite team. But as this offseason came and gone, and we're in training camp, I'm starting to think that the Packers have not taken that next step. And in essence, have they potentially just stalled a little bit? Because here's a team that their offense, they needed to add another weapon to help out Aaron Rodgers. Davante Adams, one of the better receivers in the NFL, potentially one of the most underrated receivers in the NFL. In their big games that they lost, it was because teams focused solely on Davante Adams, and the Packers had nobody else. Equanimeous St. Brown, Marquez Valdes-Scantling, guys like that, Alan Lazard, they're solid role players, but no one there could go out and make a play to help take the pressure off of Davante Adams. And Aaron Rodgers had no one to go to. He'd have to hold on to the ball, taking sacks, and all that. The Packers don't go out. They don't, in one of the deepest receiver classes that we've ever seen, they don't take a receiver. And instead, Matt LaFleur, the head coach, and their Gutekunst, their general manager, they go out and they are flipping this team to be, in essence, San Francisco 49ers 2.0. LaFleur comes from the Shanahan tree, the West Coast, the zone scheme, and you could see, after they lost to the 49ers in the playoffs last year, their offseason moves have been to replicate what the 49ers doing. We see them adding another running back in the second round. LaFleur wants to run the ball. They've got Aaron Jones. Then they go out and add A.J. Dillon, more of a bruiser. Then in the third round, they go out and they get Joseph DeGora, the tight end, who's going to play kind of a tight end fullback role. While DeGura's played, shown some flashes in camp, you still spent basically your first 3 picks. I didn't even mention Jordan Love yet, a guy that's probably not going to play for 2 years. So you've spent, in a year that you were looking to take that next step and go from being a playoff team or a playoff contender to being a Super Bowl contender, you spent it on guys that are, a guy that's not going to play for a couple years, a backup running back, and a tight end / fullback who is going to be their Kyle Juszczyk type player. And I think DeGuera's going to play, and he could play well. But this team really, I think, missed the boat. And for a team that played as well as they did last year, they won a lot of close games. And that's something that could flip because of a play or two. And so instead of finding those spots for those weaknesses, adding to and getting more weapons, I think the Packers take a step back this year because of that. And I think the Vikings, based off of what they've done, I think they take a step forward, and they are my favorite to win the NFC North. I mean, here's a team that, yes, they lost Stephon Diggs. And Jordan Jefferson was drafted in his spot, and I don't think Jordan Jefferson's going to replace Stephon Diggs as a player, but I think he fits with what they want to do, and I think, Diggs wasn't meshing well within the maybe not the locker room, but within, butting heads with the coaching staff, and, getting upset that Kirk Cousins wasn't throwing them the ball more. And so he's gone. They get Justin Jefferson to kind of play that slot, kind of be moved around. You got Adam Thielen. And the Vikings offense is predicated on the running attack. And they got Dalvin Cook. If he can stay healthy, they got Alexander Madison. So they've got two quality, an elite running back and a very good backup. They've, worked on it, adding to the offensive line. They drafted Ezra Cleveland, who I think is going to be a perfect fit in Gary Kubiak's zone blocking scheme. Potentially they move Riley Reif inside. And the offense, I think, is going to be better just based off of some of the moves that they've made. And defensively, they looked like a team. I was thinking about picking the Packers, and then because the Vikings went out and they lost a lot of guys. They lost, 2-3 starters in their secondary. They lost a starter at defensive tackle. They lost Everson Griffin, their starter at defensive end. And I'm like, okay, Mike Zimmer knows how to evaluate defenders. He always drafts corners. They drafted, Jeff Gladney. They drafted Cameron Dantzler. And so I'm like, okay, they're going to be good, but they're not going to be great. And then they go out and they trade for Yannick Ngakoue, one of the best young pass rushers in the NFL, a guy that just wanted to get out of Jacksonville so bad. He took a $6 million cut in pay to get out of there, to get to the Vikings. The Vikings gave up a second and a conditional 5th-round pick that could move up to a third. And now you have Danielle Hunter on one side, Yannick Ngakoue, who's going to come out, and he's going to ball out this year because he wants to get that big-time contract. And you got those two guys, and I think having two elite pass rushers is going to really help out this young secondary. Mike Hughes, Gladney, Dantzler, Holton Hill. They've got a lot of young corners that I think are going to need some help. And because you've got those guys, you still got Eric Kendricks, you still got Anthony Barr. I think that one addition is really going to help this defense. And I think you're going to see an improved Kirk Cousins. I think you're going to see a defense that, maybe lost a bunch of starters, but has a lot of talent still on it. And the Vikings are my pick to win the North. I think the Packers take a step back, and it's the Vikings that end up winning the division. Maybe the Packers still make the playoffs, but I think they're a step behind the Vikings at this point. Now, I talked about those two teams, but don't count out the Chicago Bears this year. I know it's in vogue to bash on the Bears, and especially on Mitchell Trubisky. I get it. Trubisky played terrible last year. The Bears did not look good last year, especially on offense. But despite all of that, despite all how bad Trubisky looked, despite how bad the offense looked, couldn't run the ball, they still went 8-8. They still finished a game or so out of making the playoffs with one of the worst quarterback performances we've seen in years. So, they bring in Nick Foles. And a lot of people are like, oh, bring in Nick Foles. Put him in at starter. He won a Super Bowl for the Eagles. I'm pumping the brakes a little bit on that. Let's not forget that Nick Foles has not had any success outside of Philadelphia in his career. He got drafted there, played there, has some mild success. He's gone other places. He was with the Rams. He was with the Chiefs. Didn't really play well either at those two places. Goes back to the Eagles, helps them win a Super Bowl, helps them win a playoff game against the Bears, goes to Jacksonville, gets hurt right away, and even when he comes back, he's not really playing that well. So while Foles fits within this scheme, Nagy was in Kansas City with him, was in Philadelphia with him the first time, so he's familiar with this offense. John DeFilippo's one of the coaches who was with him in Jacksonville. I'm not saying that he's going to come in and win this job right away and go on and have a Super Bowl winning career season. That could happen. But I think Trubisky wins this job. I think they put Trubisky in at starting quarterback to see what he has. There's, Ryan Pace, the general manager, drafted him number 2 ahead of Deshaun Watson, ahead of Patrick Mahomes. He wants Trubisky to work. So I think they're going to put out Trubisky to start with. I think he's going to play better than last year. That's a big assumption, but you can only go up from where he was last year. The offensive line, they got back in order, moving Daniels back out to guard, Whitehair back to center. They add, Allen Robinson's back. They brought in offensive coordinator Bill Lazor. They're going to run a little bit better of a run-pass option with Helfrich gone. And I think this offense is going to be better than what we see last year. And maybe Trubisky comes in and he plays the first half of the year and kind of sputters in that. Then we see Nick Foles. But I think the quarterback play will be better. And because the quarterback play will be better, to go along with their defense, they're going to still win games. They're still going to contend for a playoff spot. It would not, we forget with how bad Trubisky played last year. We forget that a couple years ago, they were one of the best teams in the NFC. A team that a lot of people thought could go to the playoffs or not go to the Super Bowl. Trubisky's not that far off from that season. We'll see if he can get back. Even if he's halfway as good as he was a couple years ago, this team is going to go to the playoffs just because their defense is so good and they've got some pieces. So don't count out the Bears. I still picking them third in this division, but don't be surprised if they have a better year than most people are saying. And then rounding out the NFC North is the Detroit Lions. And when I was preparing for this, I was looking at their roster, looking at some of their moves, and I'm like, they have talent on this team. Matthew Stafford is a good quarterback. Kenny Golladay is a good receiver. TJ Hawkinson showed a lot last year. They invested in the offensive line. Defensively, they get Okuda. But there just seems to be something missing. And you think of Patricia just has not worked out as a coach. And he's tried to bring in and make them the Patriots of the NFC North. And they've brought in guys like Trey Flowers and Jamie Collins and guys like that. And I just don't think Matt Patricia at this point has what it takes to be a successful NFL head coach. The offense has got flashes, but they just lack. The offensive line hasn't been the greatest. Receivers. Marvin Jones has played well. Kenny Golladay. They just seem to lack that little bit. They go out and get DeAndre Swift in the second round. Defensively, they really don't have a star pass rusher. That's a lot of your bigger guys. The linebackers, are just there. Jared Davis hasn't worked out. Jamie Collins hasn't worked out outside of New England. And at corner, you've got to have I love Okuda coming out, but he's still a rookie. They traded away their best safety last year to the Seahawks. And this just, to me, Patricia's coaching for his job, and I don't think he's going to coach his way out of getting fired. So I think the Lions are a team that's going to be picking in the top 10 once again. Potentially going to, Lions fans probably hoping that they get a new head coach, and we'll see if they can kind of turn things around. But this year, I don't think it's looking very good.